So a person calls me up the other day and they say to me the following: Rabbi, do you believe in ghosts? So I'm like, oh, hold on a second. I don't know what to answer. Never sure what's going to come next. So I'm like, what do you mean? We saw a ghost in our home. I said, come on, how much were you drinking? What was going on at the time? No. It wasn't just me. My daughter saw it also. My husband saw it. We've seen it a few times. I said, what's going on? So really, they've seen it a bunch of times. This is a true story, by the way, Rabbi Say. Call came in, unbelievable. That they've seen this young girl floating past at various times. But not only did they see it, okay, again, I'm talking from I heard this from they feel it. For example, she says to me, her husband was eating dinner one time, and it was late at night, it was by himself, whatever, and he felt something that was like someone else was there. He had this feeling that someone else was there, but he knew that everyone was sleeping, so it doesn't make any sense. And then all of a sudden he saw that same image of this little young girl just floating past, like, whoa. So again, you think like, okay, I'm just seeing it, I'm just imagining it, hallucinating, whatever. Until he had, maybe it was a niece or a cousin, whatever it was, this Pesach just now, Leil HaSeder, who had never heard the story before, who knew nothing about it, who was sitting there, and all of a sudden went white. In the middle of Seder night, went white. So someone said to her, like, is everything okay? I just saw something. They're like, what did you see? I saw like a younger, she described the exact same girl that everyone almost in the house had been seeing numerous times. So they asked me, do you believe in ghosts? Does it really exist or not? So I said, I want to spend a few minutes. Let's understand, is there a real thing in the Torah and Chazal as a ghost? Does it really exist? Is it something real? Or is it something that's just like, something that we dream about or just imagine? So let's spend a few minutes. First of all, I'm going to give you a few Mar Makaimis over here. There's a Gemara in Ksubas Daf Kuf Dalet, where the Gemara tells us that after Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi left this world, after he died and he was buried, he returned every Shabbos in order to make Kiddush for his family. He eventually stopped that practice because of Al's covered for other Rabbanim that didn't have that, so it showed that he was more choshev than everybody else. But it sounded like that he came back in some sort of form after he left this world. That's number one. Number two, there's a Gemara in Bava Metzia, Pei Daled Amud Beis, where the Gemara tells us that the wife of Rebbe Eliezer ben Shimon put his body in the attic after he had died, and he would shout down various halachas from the attic until many, many years later, until eventually he was buried. So we do find some idea from Chazal of people that left this world, that died, but had seemingly come back to this world at some point. There's a Gemara in Brachos, that Vav Amud Aleph, Mordechai Gemara. The Gemara says that if a person had the eye to see the mazikin, those damaging forces, no creature could endure them. Rav Huna is brought down to have said, again, look this up in the Gemara in Brachos, everyone among us, this is quite scary, has 1,000 on his left and 10,000 on his right. And they are responsible for when a person is at a shear, the Gemara says, and he feels like it's like tight, it's like very, very packed. It's because of those things around him. And not only that, sometimes his clothing gets rubbed out, the Gemara says. It's because of those things that are in the world. And if you want to discover them, the Gemara gives us a whole eitzah, taking ashes and sprinkling them around the bed. And in the morning, you'll see the footprints of a chicken. It's a gan samaisa. The Gemara goes through how to do it. So again, you seem to find this idea that things are in the world. The Arizal also, if you look at the Kavayosha, the Arizal also brings down that many people have the ability to see various neshamas that are still floating down here in this world, and they're generally hanging to trees. You have a look at the Kavayosha, it's unbelievable what he writes over there. There's a Mordechai Maritz Chias. The Maritz Chias, in the Haggadah to the Agadat on the beginning of the Ein Yaakov, the Maritz Chias wants to say that there are so many mentions in Chazal about, when you want to call them demons, Shindalad, Shendim, these sort of things that it's impossible to say that it's just something we dream about, think about, or hallucinate about. This has to be, says the Maharatz Chias, a real thing. This has to be something that has some reality to it. So what is it, Lamaisa? So a ghost is generally, if we could define it as a departed soul that sort of spends time here in the physical world rather than entering a higher spiritual domain. Why? What's the reason for that? So many different, reasons in the Sfarim HaKadoshim to why the soul resides down over here as opposed to going up. One reason is because if it was a Gilgul, if it was reincarnated more than 3 times, right, and it hasn't yet repaired what it's meant to, it can no longer enter Gehenna, and it just has to wander bodiless in this world with no physical actual structure. Others experience a premature death. By the way, there's a very famous, for those of you that learn Tanakh, I guess this has to be the most common, and I guess the first place that we find this in the Torah is Shaul HaMelech. Right? When Shaul HaMelech, who summoned a witch, Chazal tell us, so what the Torah tells us, he summoned a witch to try and get help in defeating the Pelishtim, even though it was really also to do so. So that's what the witch brought down, some kind of ghost, because he wanted Shmuel Hanavi to come and help him in defeating the Pelishtim. That's what the Navi tells us over there. So many of the Gaonim explain, what does this mean? Was this real? There was an actual ghost over here coming on, or not? So some of the Gaonim explain it wasn't really a ghost. The witch just forced Shaul HaMelech just to believe that he was conjuring up some spirit of a deceased Navi. If you look, for example, at Rav Sadia Gaon and Rav Hai Gaon, they said that normally a deceased soul is not allowed to appear into this world. However, Rav Sadia Gaon and Rav Hai Gaon both say that Shaul HaMelech had a specific nace, a miracle, that he, yes, was able to see this type of ghost. So we do see in already Tanakh this idea of a ghost, according to many Gaonim in that case. So we do find sightings of what we would call in English, again in Chazal we don't find this Lashon, of a ghost. And again, for various reasons, they continue to be in this physical world rather than going up to the spiritual places over there. Now, by the way, there's a lot of research that was done about ghosts. So, for example, the British Society for Psychical Research, SPR, you can look this up, has really spent a lot of research, a lot of time, and paid serious attention to people's encounters with ghosts. It was founded in 1882 in London by a group of very deep thinkers, and the research had come out that many of the reports of ghosts were really just illusions. However, many of them were actually verified, and many of them, and they studied the cases of the people that reported these things, were from people that died a very sudden or tragic death, and people were aware. They even found animals that were aware of the presence of these guests in the home. And by the way, not that we need any ride to Chazal, but in Shalshelas HaKabbalah, which is a sefer that goes through many different Kabbalistic ideas and many Marmakoimas, he does bring down this idea of what the SPR in London did conclude, which is that a sudden or tragic death, sometimes what they describe as hurling the soul into continued existence into the world, that is something that could cause someone to feel or even see the presence of a ghost. Another example is, by the way, a pasuk in Devarim Yud Ches that says it's also for a person to communicate with the dead. Now there's an issa to do that. It's a pasuk in the Torah, right? But it means to say that it's acknowledging that you can communicate with the dead. It's just forbidden to do so. There's a pasuk saying you're not allowed, but it means if not with that pasuk, you be'etzem would be able to do so. So those of you that are familiar, the Rambam seems to say, in Hilchas Avodas Kacham Yud Aleph, the Rambam says no. The reason for the issa is not because you can and we're telling you not to. It's just because it's foolish. It's not negay. It's just not true. And therefore that's how the Rambam learns. But others learn that no, if it's true, it can be looked at, it can be done. But a person has to know, could it be real or not? I will tell the Olim one Maisa, and then we'll end. I'm not going to give any conclusions in this exact sugya. But let me give you a Mordechai Maisa. This Maisa happened with Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, the Rav over here in Yerushalayim, not that many years ago. And the story goes like this, and this story has been verified. I'll give you some of the sources in a moment. There was a very respectable businesswoman that took it upon herself to make sure that anyone that passed away in the shtetl, in the town that she lived in, that didn't have anyone to say Kaddish, she would pay local yeshiva bochrim to say Kaddish for that person. She wanted to make sure that everyone had someone to say Kaddish after they left this world, and that's what she used to do. And she partners with her husband in his business. He was a very successful business person. He brought in a lot of money, and she was able to pay nicely the yeshiva bochrim to say Kaddish for anyone that passed away in the town that didn't have anyone to say Kaddish, family members, v'chulei. However, her husband eventually passed away, and when he did so, the business went down, everything deteriorated, and she no longer had the money she used to have. She barely had enough money to pay for her 2 daughters' dowry when they were going to get engaged soon, so she had to keep some money back for that. And she was really bitzar. She was in pain that she wasn't able to continue this amazing minig of paying yeshiva bachrim to say Kaddish for someone that passed away that didn't have someone to say Kaddish for them. So she went into the yeshiva and she begged the yeshiva, please, I know I haven't got money, but I've been doing this for years and years and I've helped you so much. Please do me a favor. Would you continue the minig for me and allow one of your bochum to say Kaddish for someone, even if I'm not going to be paying that bocha? And the yeshiva said, absolutely, we'll do it. It's a beautiful chesed. We will get a bocha to say Kaddish for anyone that passes away that doesn't have anyone to say Kaddish for them. So she was upset. She was hard. It was very hard for her. She liked to give money. She was going through a hard time. Her children were to get money. She married. She barely had money for them. It was difficult. She was walking on the street one day, and she meets an elderly man, a nice-looking Jewish man with a big white beard, who comes over to her and says, "Is everything okay? You look a bit down." She has no idea why, but she decided to spill out her whole life story. She says to him, everything is what I used to do. This is what I do now, and I can't pay, and I've got no money, and this, that, and the other. So he says to tell me, how much money do you need? So she thinks for a minute. She makes a sum that would help her daughters get married and be able to continue her minig of paying yeshiva bochum to say Kaddish, whatever. And she says quite a high sum. He says, no problem. He takes out his checkbook and he writes the check for a very large sum of money. He says, listen, before I give you the check, I need Eidim. I need 2 Eidim to make sure that they saw and they can verify that I gave this check, I wrote it, and it was signed by me. So she says, sure, let's go to the local yeshiva, they'll help me out, bring 2 bochum out. They brought 2 bochum out of the yeshiva. The 2 bochum watched and witnessed the signing of this check, which was a very, very high sum, given over to the lady, Kadash v'Kadin, everything is great. She goes to the bank in order to cash the check. And the lady behind the counter takes the check, she looks at it, she says, that's really interesting. She calls the bank manager. She gives the check to the bank manager. The bank manager faints on the spot. He faints. Everyone starts crying over, give him water, put up his legs. Eventually, he, gets back into consciousness, and he calls this lady into the office. And who gave you this check? He said, what do you mean? I was walking on the street, and a man with a white beard, he gave me. Really? She's like, what do you mean? Not only did I see it, I had 2 yeshiva bochrim who were watching, and they are eidim, they're witnesses for this. Call in the bochrim. So they go to the yeshiva, they call the 2 boys over to the bank. The 2 boys come in, absolutely, they describe the guy. Bank manager, from his pocket, takes out a picture. He says, was this the man? They're like, yeah, that's exactly the man that we saw. He couldn't believe it. He was mamish floored at that time. And he explained the following that happened. And he said, listen, I want to tell you something. That check came from my father. My father passed away 10 years ago. And last night he came to me in a dream. And he said that since I had a son that went off the derech, that didn't unfortunately keep Yiddishkeit the way he's meant to, his father's soul, him he's talking about, that's in the dream, was tormented in the next world because nobody was saying Kaddish on my behalf because my son, my only son, wasn't religious. If not for this woman who's arranging Kaddish for people that didn't have to say Kaddish for them, then my soul would never have had moments rest in the next world. So the bank manager's speaking over this, and he's like, it was a joke. I woke up this morning, I'm like, oh, what a joke. This never happened. What garbage. I don't believe in all these things. And when you walked in today and you explained and you saw my father 10 years after he left this world, and the story all makes sense, you're the woman that gets people to say Kaddish, then obviously you can have this money, which was a lot of money, and he gave her the money. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonefeld, the Rav of Yerushalayim, said that he was one of those yeshiva bachrim that were called from the yeshiva in order to testify for that. And the other one was his friend Rabbi Yehuda Greenwald. The bank manager, by the way, did do tshuva, was chayzer b'tshuva, and he was religious afterwards. By the way, if you want to look the story up, it's in many, many places. One of them is Ha'esh ala Choyma. It's also translated in Guardian of Yerushalayim, 1985. And in Sha'arei Emunah, page 192, the author writes that Rabbi Avram Bardaki of Yerushalayim told him that he personally knew the grandson of the bank manager who confirmed this story. So there are many confirmations of this story that is a true story in that case. And you should know, my wife also called up the wife of Rabbi Shemaiah Morgenstern, Shlita, and asked her, does your husband believe in ghosts? And she said, absolutely he does, because there are many Maramakoimas. And by the way, based on the research that we said before, I asked this person who called me up, what is the story with the house that you're living in? And they said that there was a boy that died at a very young age, who died tragically in that house. So we seems to see from many Maramakoimis, from Chazal, from Tanakh, and from studies that were done, that there can indeed be a sugya of ghosts. What to do about it, I don't know. That's maybe for a different share. Have an amazing day.